computer. So, okay, and I'll go ahead and share my screen. And, okay, so can you see?
Yes.
The first slide. Okay. Let me just set this up. Great. All right.
Okay, great. So I will disappear, or I will turn off my camera. Is it okay? Or do you want to keep it on okay. So I just okay. Yeah, so I will just key in. Okay. Let's see. And I mute myself. I think this is also important.
Right, yes. Okay. Okay. So thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to share my kind of research and experience with this fascinating and very important topic so far. And I'm going to talk to you today about the roles of women in USA graphic design history, and hopefully get a nice kind of insight behind the scenes of this huge topic, maybe as a start to a longer discussion. So just to kind of introduce myself, this is where I'm currently located, in Rochester, upstate New York. This is a city on Lake Ontario, basically closer to Canada than New York City, which is mostly what people kind of think, that I'm in this cool city. I'm not. A very beautiful city up in the north. And I work and teach at RIT, the Rochester Institute of Technology. And this is like a snapshot of our campus. And I'm an assistant curator at the Carey Graphic Art Collection at the RIT Libraries. And I'll very briefly introduce you to our library. It was founded in 1969. And it is a rare book and special collections library devoted to graphic communication history and practices. So our collections of over 45,000 books and about 130 archival collections are enormous. They're all dedicated to graphic communication, and they span through a very impressive range, starting from ancient scrolls to medieval manuscripts to various printing technologies, and all the way to contemporary artist books. So really, all the things that you can think about in terms of graphic design, you can find with our collections, which is very exciting. And today we'll focus on one of our collections within the Carey, and it's called the Graphic Design Archive Collection. And in it, we preserve the work of significant graphic designers in the United States that were active during the mid-20th century, as well as selected contemporary designers that are working in the modernist aesthetic. So we have over 40 design professionals that are represented through their personal papers, their unique artwork, various publications, finished client work commissions, and really hold millions of artifacts that include every type of media. So drawings, films, manuscripts, paintings, prints, sculptures, correspondence, and recordings. And this is just a tremendous source for so many different kinds of research into design history. And this is the founder of the Graphic Design Archive, or GDA, as we call it for short. And this is Professor Emeritus Roger Remington. He launched the GDA in the 1980s and really laid the foundation for several decades of growth. And at this point, I would like to turn your attention to the fact that out of the 45 designers in this archive, 10 are women professionals in design, which, considering the time and the history, is quite significant. So during Professor Remington's research on some of the male designers in this archive, he went out and interviewed women designers who were related to the men designers. So these were women that worked for the male designers or under them. They studied with them. They were married to them. They really supported their work in his knowledge and perception. And this is how he learned about their own meaningful contribution to design history as designers, as educators in their own rights, and not just in a supporting role to their male counterparts. In 2005, he established an elective course called Women Pioneers in Design. And this is a semester during which he and the students center on the contribution which key women designers have made in the history of design in the United States. And this year, I was privileged and very honored to teach this course after Professor Remington's retirement. And throughout the semester, me and the students are really using RIT's rare resources to explore the work, the processes, the nature of these pioneering efforts of these designer women. And we examine design items and learn about the historical, cultural, social, political context, all this kind of trying to make the context as big and as deeper as possible in order to really better understand the challenges that these designers faced in their career and in their lives as women. Now, since our collection is extremely focused, it covers mostly Euro-American women. And I really had the pleasure of looking and working to expand the syllabus of this course to include more diversity and to address issues of marginalized voices in design more generally. And since I won't be able to cover this today with you, I just want to share some of the kind of, let's say, highlight just a couple of sources that I worked with and was deeply kind of inspired and intrigued by them. So these are two books that were published by the Princeton Architectural Press in 2021 and are both just fantastic, fascinating, very easy to read, and I highly recommend them. And if this really piques your interest, I just want to say that there is so much more out there. This is just one more example of an online BIPOC design history course, which I'm actually taking at the moment. So again, there is a lot of research and a lot of energy that is being now focused on many different narratives of design history, not necessarily the ones that we have been taught so far. So this is kind of my way to encourage you to further research this topic. But let's go back to our focus today. And now we can start to talk about the roles of women in United States of America, graphic design history. And to really kick this off, I would like to start with Professor Martha Scotford's research in design history and share with you her special emphasis on women in design and feminist theory. Her published writings have appeared in many highly esteemed publications, and this is one of them that I think and feel is most crucial to our subject, and really a very good way to kind of start thinking about women in the history of graphic design. So this first was published in 1994 in the journal Visible Language in a special issue that was dedicated to critical histories of graphic design. And in this article, Scotford is introducing the idea of messy history versus neat history. And she writes, for the contribution of women in graphic design to be discovered and understood, their different experiences and roles within the patriarchal and capitalist framework they share with men, and their choices and experience within a female framework, we must be acknowledged and explored. Neat history is conventional history, a focus on the mainstream activities and work of individual, usually male designers. Messy history seeks to discover, study, and include the variety of alternative approaches and activities that are often part of women designers' professional lives. So this kind of sets us off. I highly recommend reading this article. It really raises a lot of very important questions in a very deep and meaningful way. So to follow Scottford's suggestion, let's try and first very kind of broadly talk about the roles of women in the USA history. And as we will unfold that, we will eventually narrow it down to specifically graphic design. And we will cover today specifically the period of time between 1750 and 1950. So that means that we will not go into feminist movement in the US, but we will lay the ground for the first wave feminism that focused mainly on voting rights, property rights, and gender equality in the 19th century. And then we will stop just before the beginning of the second wave feminism in the early 60s that worked to increase gender equality in a wider range of issues like the workspace, family, domesticity, reproductive rights, and sexuality. And finally, we will go behind the scene and we will take a closer look at the work of C.P. Pinellas. And we will kind of use this as a case study to show how she became financially independent and fully integrated into the male-dominated field of design. And she really, truly inspired future generations of women to follow in her footsteps. So let's begin and talk about generally the roles of women in US history. So women's status in society was undermined mostly through three aspects. The first is gender roles, limited access to education, and finally no payment or low payment due to their race and gender. And this is the 3 points that I'll try to, again, cover very briefly. Let's start with the 1800s gender roles. So this is a time when biological determinism works very hard against women in all fields of education and profession. And the perception was that women were naturally designed for domesticity. They were kind of created for marriage and for childbearing. And they might not choose to do that, or in some cases were unable to do that, but that's what they were designed for. And that meant that if, for whatever reason, a woman did not become a married mother, she would be seen as a defective woman. So she would be a less of a woman and she would be outcast from society. So we live in a time where there are very separate spheres of activities for men and for women. There are things that were appropriate and things that were not. And just think about, I mean, if we look at it since through our kind of current eyes, think about how limiting that is, both to men and women. And I would like to kind of visually illustrate this idea with these two prints from 1848 called The Life and Age of Women versus The Life and Age of Men, Stages of Life from the Cradle to the Grave. Now, these two prints, we can spend hours looking at and decoding them and reading all the text and all the analogies that are within. This is truly fascinating. However, for the purpose of our kind of introduction to this subject, I just want to let us look at this pyramid, right? The stages from the cradle to the grave, and look at men versus women at their peak of this pyramid, right? This peak of their lives, supposedly. Very strange things are happening here. We can see this is 1848. The Mexican-American War is happening. So we can see how patriotic the men are depicted. They're upright, they're very strong, they're being compared with wild animals. And on the other hand, something very strange is happening to this illustration of a woman at that peak of that pyramid, while just one step below it to the left, you can see that she's a mother and she looks quite young and beautiful. And then all of a sudden, it looks like things are taking into a very big and very bad turn. So again, just to kind of illustrate the perception and the activities of men versus women. We move forward to talk about girls' access to education during the 1800s. And this is a time where finally the government recognized institutes that could be opened for women's higher education. So it allowed for some controlled access for girls to education. It happened mostly in Philadelphia, Massachusetts, and New York. So women could be educated, but they could be educated only in accordance to their gender roles, right? So the most prominent example was women being educated to become teachers. Of course, everything that happened and every access to education that they had to be stopped once they got married. So let's say they were educated, they became teachers, they were very successful teachers. Once they got married, they had to quit and go back to fulfill their womanly duties as women and mothers. And this is how teaching is actually becomes the first female profession in the US, because it was considered appropriate for women. This was the assumption that all women had this natural maternal instinct, and therefore they would be or they could be teachers. And it's also important to mention that African-American women taught in segregated school. So again, there is this very strong segregation between the white American and the African-American. Women could also have access to study art, but they had very specific restriction, again, following what was considered appropriate for women. So if we're looking at these two photos, for example, we learn that women were not allowed to study human anatomy. They could not draw life classes. They could not draw nude men, with contrast to men who's been doing it for centuries. And if we focus in on these two images, we can see that women were actually allowed to draw animals. So what you're seeing here on the right-hand side in the picture is a life class where a cow is modeling instead of a nude man. And this is really critical and important to understand how technically inferior that would make women artists, women students. They were just banned this access to becoming as, let's say, qualified and skilled as in comparison to the male student. And again, this is rooted in this idea of gender roles, of what men can do and what women can do. In the context of women being artists or being capable of being artists, it was also believed at the time that women could not be creative or inventive. Just biologically, their purpose was to praise and support the creative people, which were male. And this is where I would like to point out Linda Nochlin. She was a prominent feminist art historian, and she became mostly known for her pioneering article that she published in 1971, titled, "Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists?" And it was published in Art News. And again, I recommend kind of revisiting it today and see her explanation about how basically Western society does not allow women artists this equal footing. So again, a very important and interesting read that is very specific to our field of applied art. And we're moving on to talk about work in the colonial period. So this is pre-industrial revolution between the 1750s and the 1850s. So this is a time before there were machines and tools to help perform tasks. And that meant that all work took place at home. Husbands and wives and children are all a part of this independent family system that required mutual support to function successfully. So both men and women, work was equally valued. And we can largely cut this type of works into three different parts. First was the productive labor. That meant that the family was producing items for the household consumption, but also for exchange or trade in the market. The second type of work was the domestic labor, and that was labor that was primarily concerned with maintenance of the household. And the third type of work was reproductive labor. That meant raising children or nurturing workers. And once the process of industrialization starts, it really dramatically changes the nature of work. So we turn now into this reality where most work is done outside of the home, and it is mostly done by men and boys. So we see here a photo of young men working outside of the home in a factory. And as cash economy grows, men are getting paid with money, and their paid work becomes more valued than women's unpaid domestic and reproductive labor that they are doing at home. It's still unpaid, and it's getting increasingly less and less visible. And this starts this kind of notion that domestic and reproductive labors are not real work. So these three types of labors are turning into something very different. Again, the productive labor is being paid. It's done by men and boys, but the domestic labor is done by women and girls, and it is unpaid, as well as the reproductive labor. We do, however, have young women with some ability to go out and work outside of the home. For example, this is a textile mill in kind of the late 800s, and you can see the women working in this factory. But again, they were able to work and earn money until they got married. So again, even they started this way of life, whether they liked it or not, once they got married, they had to stop it and go back to the home. A very interesting thing happens during wartime. And we'll cover the kind of three main wars in this time period. And this is a time where most men go to war, and there's a serious shift in the status quo. So during the Civil War, for example, the profession of nursing was now opened for women because of a shortage of male staff due to the high casualty rates. And this allowed women to take more active roles outside of the homes. They were serving as nurses in the hospitals, they were taking leading roles in sanitary commissions, and they were taking work in clerical roles in the government. So really kind of making up to a need while the men were away. For the during the First World War, we see women are serving as stenographers, as clerks, radio operators, messenger, truck drivers, mechanics, basically every type of work that is non-combat. And what happens is that once women started working in public, it ultimately proved difficult for all women to return back to this domestic sphere. So this what kind of started to pave the way for future generation to join the workforce and to receive education and later on to vote and to take really more active roles in society that, again, many of us really take for granted today. During World War II, there was this, again, this urgent need for working hands, and factories actually hired a very high wage for women to come in and replace the works in different fields, again, with the absence of the working men that were serving in the war. And this is maybe the most famous allegorical cultural icon of the United States. This poster of We Can Do It depicts Rosie the Riveter, and she represents the women who worked in factories and shipyards during World War II. And then we see, you know, a real depiction of a woman who was actually drilling the rivets and working during that time. But what happens when the war is over? The soldiers are returning home, and we see hundreds of thousands of women that are fired more or less overnight. They lose their jobs, and again, the reality changes over. And what becomes of Rosie the Riveter? So the government now needs a huge media campaign to get these women back into the home. And we see this really fascinating redomestication efforts starting across all medias, magazines, radio, television was just at the first, its first steps. So women in these times are really facing with very heavy pressure to find complete fulfillment in the domestic sphere, even though most of them are already out and are part of the workforce. So most working women were over age of 35. They held part-time jobs, and they were low paying. They were mostly sales clerks or secretaries or bank cashiers. And they were always paid less than their male counterparts, even though they were doing the exact same job. And this is a key theme in women's history, along with the denial of the unpaid housework as real work. The family wage ideal served to, again, undermine women's economic citizenship. And this ideal was something that employers used to justify paying women almost half of what they would pay for men, again, for the exact same job. And the idea was that women's wages were always supplemental to those of a male breadwinner, which, of course, when you think about it, is ridiculous, because, you know, we have so many different life situations, and this is really something that is not it's nonsensical. This specifically put single women at great risk of poverty, and sometimes prostitution was the only way for them to survive. So in the early 1900s, a young woman was making $5 a week if she worked in a store, but she could make up to $35 a week if she was working as a prostitute. And in the South, African-American women could work only in either the factory jobs that the white women wouldn't take, or as domestic servants. So again, very controlled and very limited. And this is an example of a labor market that allows employers to pay some workers less for the same work just because of who they are. So just based on their race and gender. You can clearly see the discrimination in that. The next burning issue is the need for childcare. So for mothers that had to work for a living at that time, this was a serious issue. And I would like to read you a quote from Laura Jane Adams, who was an American activist, reformer, social worker, and philosopher and author. And this is her describing 3 children that were crippled while their mothers were at work. So she says, one had fallen out of a 3rd story, another had been burnt, and the 3rd had a curved spine due to the fact that for 3 years he had been tied all day long to the leg of a kitchen table. So this is, again, a very serious issue. And the reality of those working mothers had a variety of descriptions. As you can see here, double burden, double day, 2nd shift, double duty. And all of these names are these descriptions of the workload for people who work to earn money, but were also responsible for significant amounts of unpaid domestic labor. So again, this really impossible situation. And I want to read another quote by Mary Anderson, who was a Swedish-American labor activist, who asked, the whole question, it seems to me, comes down to this. Shall we let women continue working longer hours than men, for less pay than men, and continue doing 2 jobs to their husband's 1? So a very burning question. So I hope this kind of paints a very wide and kind of a very let's say general overview of what it really meant to be a working woman during that time in history in the United States of America. But in spite of this discrimination, there were women that achieved financial independence and that did become integrated into male-dominated profession. So how were they able to do it? Very broadly speaking, because there are a wide range of realities, what we know of mostly are white, middle, and upper class women that had access to education. Not only did they have access to education, they really had to excel at their studies and their profession. They had to either inherit money or married into money. So again, the economic situation of these ladies was very crucial. Then we had women who were married into a network of the profession. So again, women who supported their husband's work. And mostly these women that were able to kind of progress in their working career had a support of a male professional. So it always took some kind of progressive thought on the side of some kind of male supporter, whether it's a spouse or a colleague or a teacher. So they mostly needed, again, the push and the hug from the establishment and from patriarchy in order to really create their own path. So that was more or less C.P. Pinellas's profile. Again, I'm drawing this with really, really broad strokes to kind of for us to get into this idea. And certainly the more you dive into her story, you learn more. And as I said before, there are several very varied accounts of women which succeeded each in her own way. And the reason that I want to really talk about C.P. Pinellas is that the Carey collection preserves her archive in the Graphic Design Archive. And I have to tell you that I think it's probably one of the most popular teaching collections that we have. We pull it out for students. We have researchers coming from all over to see this collection and learn more about Pinellas. So this is really a collection that we are using extensively. And so we have a lot of resources and a lot of historical information that is laid out as in front of us. And it is really a rare opportunity to explore and understand Pinellas's success. So C.P. Pinellas was an Austrian-born graphic designer and art director. She made her career in the magazine industry in New York. She was the first woman art director of many major magazines, as well as being the first person to bring fine art into the mainstream mass-produced media. She married 2 prominent designers. She was twice widowed, and she had 2 children and 2 grandchildren. And just before we go and explore her story and her work, I do want to step aside for a minute and talk about women's magazine in the United States to, again, have a better understanding of how C.P. Pinellas started her career. So among those gendered roles that women could find themselves, we see many talented young women that were involved in journalism and publications. So they were really able to find their best chances and opportunities of work within this industry. And magazines, I think, are really important media source that goes out to millions of people. It has gone out throughout history, and it still does, maybe not as much in printed media, but certainly in online media. And I think it's fascinating because this is a document that really reflects many social and cultural trends, and it makes it a really important historical source for us to learn from. And when we're thinking specifically about graphic design, it was such a crucial part of what a magazine is, right? Typesetting, typography, illustration, lettering, photography, applied arts or commercial arts that later were named as graphic design. All of these are essential for the creation of this product, right, of this magazine. And especially when journals started being sold on newsstands, and covers became more important and really critical for their sales. Another important thing to remember about women's magazines is they are essential private businesses in a capitalistic society. So they have the constraints of being commercial entities, but they also are kind of rooted with the idea of making profit. So this is, in a way, this kind of window that women could kind of step through because they were seen as consumers. These were magazines that were directed specifically for women to purchase. And it also encouraged women to create this product for women. So in terms of content and design, we see more and more women being involved within this industry through the years. So let's give, again, a very brief overview of the history of those magazines in the United States. This is the first magazine that were directed specifically at women consumers, and it appeared in 1792. That was about 50 years after the first general interest magazine appeared. So this first publication was called Ladies' Magazine and Repository of Entertaining Knowledge. Very long and not catchy title at all. It appeared in Philadelphia, and it was primarily a literary magazine for an elite upper class group that were able to read, so they were literate, and they could also afford to buy the magazine itself. And as we move forward in time, we see that in 1860, we have a magazine that is considered one of the most successful and high circulating women magazines of the 19th century. And it was called Godey's Ladies Book. And it has many strengths, and some of it was contributed to the fact that it had a very skilled editor who was a woman. Her name was Sarah Josepha Hale. As we move into the late 19th century, there is a significant rise in the magazine industry that follows really the advancements of railroads and mass production techniques, affordable postage rates, and advertising. And in the 1870s and 1860s, we have this 6 magazines that we see here, their covers, and they are the big names in women magazines businesses through all the way through World War II. And these women's magazines were pioneering in various fields. So they were pioneering in advertising, in very creative promotion techniques, and in circulation numbers, which is very interesting and very critical. So just for example, in 1904, we have Ladies' Home Journal, who was the first magazine of any kind to have over 1 million readers. And at the helm of this magazine, again, there was a very talented and successful woman editor. Her name was Louisa Knapp. And although she was extremely successful, she did decide to step down and turn her attention to take care of her daughter. So we always see this conflict between the career and the childcare, even when women did kind of achieve that very successful and independent career. So by the 1930s, the magazine is a mature industry. It has lots of competition for the readers and for the advertisers. And this is where C.P. Pinellas had the opportunity to do her work and where she started to make her career that later on in life allowed her to become a freelance designer as well as a design educator. So for us to kind of take a deeper dive, I want to share with you just a segment from Amelia Hugel-Fontenelle's lecture called C.P. Pinellas, Art Director Extraordinaire. And Hugel-Fontenelle is the Carey Collection Associate Curator, and she's been working very closely with the Pinellas archives for years now. So again, let's see her a part of her online presentation.
C.P. Pinellas, our Art Director Extraordinaire. I entitled this talk this way because not only was she a talented art director for editorial design, but she was an extraordinary illustrator and letterer and art educator as well. She broke into a man's world with style, and she deserves to be part of the canon of the history of graphic design. Her given name was Sipora, was born in 1908, and she emigrated from Vienna with her family in 1923. She went to Pratt Institute eventually, and she taught watercolor after that time. She broke into magazines as she worked as an assistant to the famed art director, Dr. M.F. Aga at Condé Nast, specifically in Vogue and Vanity Fair. She did this as his assistant from 1932 to 38. This picture here I'm showing is a gouache that C.P. Pinellas painted depicting Dr. Aga's office with this kind of swarm of fashion editors pitching their articles. You can imagine the cacophony of women's voices as they were trying to jostle to get their pieces in the magazine. C.P., she's completely absorbed and at the right of the picture in artwork in the office and kind of ignoring all of this chittering, you can imagine. Here's a collage in the archive that she mocked up for Vogue, and then the resulting final cover. So this is a collage of photographs of pieces of jewelry, and then this clipping of hands and a face, and then the resulting piece that finally went to press in 1939. From 1939 to 46, she worked at Glamour magazine and eventually became its art director. In her archive here, there are several of these planning sheets that she would create for the layout of each issue. They're done with gouache and pen and ink. And occasionally, we set a student at RIT to page through and find the corresponding printed issues to match the illustrated guides to their planning sheets. So as you can see here in this guide, there's this pink and purple layout, and you can see how she really imagined it in the planning sheet there and how it was eventually executed. Sepia was pretty accurate, as you can see, when she got to the stage of production for sequencing the imagery of that magazine, in addition to the typography. Let's look at this red cover from 1942, when she was just promoted to art director at Glamour. It's this tour de force of photo montage, hand lettering, and typography. That G is fashioned out of cut paper. Just like this tagline, any girl can make herself at least 50% more attractive. I think these freestyle effects of lettering are at least 50% more attractive than the spindly Bodoni-esque mastheads that took over soon after in fashion publications. And you can see those on the right, those kind of skinny letters there, very thin. Sometimes I call them as thin as the models, but this wonderful exuberant hand lettering in her work. But you know, fashion, especially editorial fashion, is fickle, and she often had to change the look of her pages. So I'm going to read a quote from her. In the fashion world, which was my training ground, nobody looked for definitions. They only looked for an effect. The arrangement of pictures and text on the magazine spread was an exercise in lack of self-control. Photographs were not always cropped. Sometimes we tore them. Sometimes we burned the edges, perforated them, pinked them, curled them. Every editorial spread was designed to create a new surprise within the magazine, a shock, a change of pace from the preceding and following one. It's kind of a contrast to modernism, isn't it? During World War II, C.P. Pinellas married another designer who would become very famous, and his name was Bill Golden. You may know him as the designer of the CBS I logo. But she carried on her own career. In 1947, she got a very singular opportunity to take the first magazine for teens, especially girls, called 17, to new levels. And I want to direct your attention to her team in the black and white photograph at the bottom. Helen Valentine on the left was the editor, C.P. was the art director, and Estelle Ellis was the promotion director. So the three of these talented women worked together to open up a new target market for consumerism, young women. C.P. worked there until 1950. She, off the bat, employed a really talented group of illustrators and photographers to make 17 visually groundbreaking. She employed Ben Shahn, Jacob Lawrence, Andy Warhol, and the cartoonist Hirschfeld. She spoke about how she got fine artists to work for her in a 1958 speech about Ben Shahn. She said, "Some years ago, I tried an experiment. I wasn't the first American art director to introduce the work of painters into mass publications, but I did have an opportunity to do it on an important and consistent scale. I was the art director of a new magazine called 17. It was a stimulating publication edited by Helen Valentine, who had discovered a new world of young people, people who hadn't enough experience to know what an acceptable illustration should be. These young people seemed to represent as nearly as uncorrupted and unprejudiced audience as one could find. I thought there was an opportunity to give them a new experience in seeing that was spoiled for an older generation. It seemed to me that if magazine fiction pages were illustrated by painters, then the readers would either accept or reject them without being challenged to accept them as art. And then maybe some young people would be moved by these paintings. My plan was to give the artist a story, let him decide what to paint, and insist that we would only publish the picture only if he liked it well enough to exhibit in his own gallery. It would have to stand on its own as a painting, even when it was divorced from the magazine pages. It's a really great insight about the art world that was moving along and collaborating with the editorial world in New York City at that time. But CB worked with a lot of artists, but she also rolled up her own sleeves and added her own illustration to the layouts. She also had photo shoots done at her Victorian home in upstate New York. She was a seasoned professional in magazine publishing, and she moved to Charm in 1950, and she stayed there for a decade. Charm was a magazine targeted at the young urban woman who was living between school and marriage. I want you to look at the cover at the left. I think the sleekness depicted in CB's conversions of imagery and typography is so masterful in Charm, is very modernist for sure. This kind of allusion to sophistication attracted these readers who were searching for, as you can see the tagline, the miracles for women who work. I'm still searching for these miracles. But look at the model's flawless composure. It's enough to eclipse the everyday problems seen in the monospaced words at the background. Like those words are saying, moth-proofing, lipstick that won't smudge, wrinkle resistant, and the one that I just saw this morning, drugs to keep you on the job. What was happening in 1950? Anyway, C.B. Pinellas won awards repeatedly for her art direction during her tenure at Charm magazine. I find layouts like these to be particularly fresh and modern, that collision of typography elements, but also elements that are on a diagonal in addition to the rectangular linear elements there. And the photography is just so well done, even if we could never fit in those outfits today. This is in C.B. Pinellas's archive here at RIT. It's this large sheet of paper with copies of all the Charm covers that she designed. She pasted this up as a quick record of her work. It's these kinds of ephemeral documents in her archive that are just wonderful to show students. And I like to show this particularly to students to say that look at how she's taken the actual main image and really worked with the masthead typography. Sometimes it's eclipsed, sometimes it's broken, sometimes it's the typography is in front of the model, sometimes it's behind. She actually broke the form of that repeatedly. Just so inventive.
So that was just a snippet out of this online presentation that I highly recommend. The link is available and it's on our YouTube channel of the Carey Collection. So I invite you to dig into that and really explore the wonderful resources and the research that has been done so far on C.B. Pinellas's work. I want to emphasize something kind of generally about graphic design and specifically about C.B. Pinellas that I've learned through researching her work myself and her archive for this course. So I can't stop emphasize enough the collaborative nature of graphic design. There are always the famous designers that we all know and admire their works, but we really need to understand that this is not like a lonely artist sitting in their atelier and kind of doing everything that has to do with design, right? There are so many people involved. There are so many positions to be filled in this commercial space, in this really applied art that is essentially wrapping a product, whether it's for commerce or for cultural purposes. And I'm emphasizing this fact because I've seen C.P. Pinellas's influence on the other women that we have their archives preserved. Amelia Hugo Fontanelle, a curator, pointed out Helen Valentine, the editor, and Estelle Elise Rubinstein, and how they collaborated together and how they really empowered one another. And then we see that C.P. Pinellas also influenced the kind of next generation of women designers, and were very generous and again collaborative in her work. So just to kind of speak to that nature of the work generally, and to highlight the collaboration that were happening in between women that really empowered one another to work and to pursue their own independence. The other fascinating thing that I was able to find in our archive were recordings of interviews with C.P. Pinellas. And I would like to, before I kind of conclude this long talk, to share again just an excerpt from an interview that was filmed in 1986 when C.P. Pinellas visited RIT to kind of attend an event that was happening around a design exhibition that was devoted to the works of her husband. So the footage is not of great quality, but if you see, you can actually kind of detect her sitting in the space surrounded by the work of other designers, basically. And we see Professor Roger Remington moderating this discussion. And it's, first of all, I find it the greatest value to be able to hear from designers reflect on their own career in their own words. And I think this is maybe even the most kind of touching primary source that we have when we learn about these designers and their work and their life. But also, I wanted to point out that although C.P. Pinellas was asked many questions about her husband, she did offer a very valuable insight into her own work, and specifically her work as a woman, in the industry. So I want to finish by just a few minutes of her kind of sharing her own account, and specifically referring to the nature of women's work.
I want to say a word about my first important job. First I had an unimportant job, meaning the work was interesting, but I never got paid, though I presumably had a salary. So luckily, I was offered the job just about then for some window displays I had made out of shoeboxes by Mr. Condé Nast. And he said that I should come up and see the Condé Nast art director, whose name was M.F. Aga. He was a Turkish-Russian art director who had gotten a great deal of his training with the Dorland agency both in Berlin and in Paris. And I showed up at Dr. Aga's for my interview. And he looked at my portfolio, and then he said, "Who sleeps with cats?" I didn't know who slept with a cat. And Aga says, "Mrs. Katz, you're hired." So I got a job there, and was a very good place, because not only was Aga very wonderful to work for, and witty, but I was at first sitting in his office because they couldn't find a place for me. And I stayed there for at least a year, and by that time I heard all the gossip. And when I was moved into the large art department, into the bullpen, I was no longer privy to all this inside stuff that I used to know. It was big come down. But there we had lots of luxurious time. I would be given a problem without a time limit. I was given sometimes 6 photographs and asked to make an arrangement of these 6 photographs on a double page, let's say for Vogue. We had sheets of type already set, different sizes of Bodoni book for, let's say, for the body type, but also caps set, you know, just a gray sheet of caps and a great many in Bodoni bold, Bodoni extra bold, ultra Bodoni. There was a cabinet with all of these sheets. And we also had a photostat room, and you could order as many photostats as you wanted. And I wasn't given a time schedule. I don't mean that I was specially privileged. Others were doing the same thing. But it was a laboratory to find out what special effects, what impact could you make with these 6 photographs on 2 pages, and you were supposed to really research it. Showed Aga 6 or 8 versions of the same double-page spread, and I found out that ordering photostats and then waiting for them, and then ordering another set of photostats and waiting for them, and still a third and a fourth and a fifth and sixth, that took too long. I would lose the thread of what I was doing. So I invented a way to just double Scotch tape the pictures lightly on the page and have the stat boys take the layout, and then I'd take the same stats, I'd redo some other way. And I saved so much money in stat room that I got a raise. I don't think that there are very many jobs today where young designers can just take as much time as we had with one problem. That they're put into a job and they're expected to produce. Would you say so, Roger?
Mm-hmm. I think that's this laboratory that you've talked
Yes.
about was a rare thing. I know also Alexei Brodovich tried to do a similar thing.
Right.
But I think there's much more accountability now for the
Right.
time of the designer on the board, and you don't have this kind of open-ended situation as a rule.
On Vogue magazine with Dr. Aga, and you said that you have the luxury of time to explore and to work on projects and no definite timeline. I'm wondering if you could reflect on how maybe that happened, because clearly those magazines kept coming out every 2 a month or once or whatever. There were publication deadlines. There was I would assume, a relatively limited staff. There wasn't all the equipment to make things happen faster the way there is now. What is it that made it possible that even with deadlines, the same inexorable deadlines as currently have, why did you have that luxury of time then? What was different then?
Well, what was different was that they really made room for a large staff. And they had some old-timers who got the magazine out on time. And they were the slobs who had to meet deadlines. But we, the younger ones, were given all the time in the world, and we didn't necessarily know for which issue we were trying to do this portfolio for. So they had many more people than they needed. They also paid us very low salaries. They could afford us.
Oh, Sorry. So, yeah, so that was this kind of firsthand testimony of C.P. Pinellas and what her work and women's work was like. And I think that, you know, just that those few minutes of really kind of listening to her is so revealing on so many different aspects. And also the question that came from the audience about how was that luxury of time and experimentation was available to them, and the very simple answer was that they were paid very little. They could afford them. So again, kind of revealing the issues that women had to deal with during that time, while they were contributing so much in their from their professional skills. So I've been talking a lot, and I would like to thank you for listening, and I would love to hear any comments or questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shani. Like, this was really a pleasure to listen to your presentation, and I learned so much, like, within this hour. Yeah, it's like nearly an hour, but it's really like a lot of information and many seeds for thoughts. Like, I think so many things that normally, like, we don't think about and we take for granted, but it's not such a long time ago like that women really like worked for nothing, or just like seen as like very cheap labor. So, and I think this is also kind of a very fragile situation right now. Like, we take this for granted, like our way of living nowadays, but maybe it is quite fragile. So this is somehow, yeah, what I thought during the talk. I would like to have like 2 questions maybe, or I would like to give you 2 questions, and and it's up to you, like how much you talk about it or how deep you go into it. And one is like more about, yeah, very general question about collections and also about ephemeral and so on. As you are working now in an archive, and I think, yeah, you are surrounded by many different designs. And some of them maybe we wouldn't think about, like taking it, like, or keeping it for generations to come, and keeping it like for people to stay or to be available for the next generations. And now I give you like a very naughty question in a way, like thinking like from the perspective of digital natives. So why do we need those like paper stuff, and why does it have to be physical? Like, we can just Google it and maybe just ask yeah, ChatGPT or any other like AI stuff, so to help us out with those kind of research. So why do we need these physical items?
This is a fantastic question. I'm very happy you asked it, and I'll try to answer it in the kind of the most simple and direct way. But let me start with just the idea or the understanding that archives can be many different things, and you know, it's a whole profession of archiving specific collections, and collections can be their scope is very different. But I think that specifically graphic design collections and those really encompassing collections for the designers, that we have almost everything from their career, right? This really range of, like, broad range of, from the personal to the professional. First of all, it's physically there. So no one curates it. No one decides on what medium or platform it goes. Usually, again, I have C.P. Pinellas' archive in mind. These would be hundreds of boxes of just the materials that she produced throughout of her life. And it gives you this, I think, this maybe the most, the wider way of looking at everything that she went through. And most importantly, I think for our understanding, it's not the published work. So it's not all those amazing magazines that some of them we can see online, or, or just the products that we can buy somewhere, right? Or see wonderful images on Google because someone decided to take a photo or digitize or upload them and share them. We have almost everything, or everything that C.P. Pinellas wanted to save, right? According to her motivations. So we really get this kind of round look at things, and not only the end results. We can learn about the processes. And I think that in terms of being a design student or a designer that keeps learning throughout the practical career, for sure, being able to trace a designer's process, to my opinion and experience, is way more meaningful than even analyzing or decoding the final product. And this is exactly the kind of the highlight of the work with our collections. We spread out a range of sketches. There is no kind of, scientific evidence for anything, but it's this ability to visit the brain and the mind of the designer and really try to kind of imagine, basically, or maybe have some kind of an educated guess as to the works. And when you're able to work with those paper physical materials, because that was the means of production back then, and really understand the contextual, as many contextual, topics that you have, again, political, social, I think the value of your understanding as a designer and your ability to see how other designers were able to come up with, with solving design problems are so enriching. And the fact that it comes from something that is different to your day-to-day life really makes you kind of, work harder. So I think that the very, very short and shallow answer to this is that I really believe that working and seeing and touching and understanding those material products at the end of the day can really make you a better designer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can totally understand it because we both studied at Reading and went through the class by Michael Twyman.
Yes.
And I think like this was really like one of the eye openers like we
Absolutely.
had during the time. Yes. And so, and especially like looking now at C.P. Pinellas, do you think like she kept other things than her, for example, male fellows or the male designers? Like,
Absolutely.
do you see other things?
Yes. And this is again this kind of the beauty and the truth of our profession, and the fact that it is a collaborative effort. So this is actually the very first thing that I started to do as an assistant curator, was to study our graphic design archive and to find all the connections between all 45 designers. And they are so many, because people work together. People were aware of one another, even in a competition, to see what the other designers are doing around the States. We see the generations of the design professors and the design students. We see the assistants, and we see the collaboration. So again, a lot of designers were working for the same brands, and some specific briefs were given to more than one designer. So just to say, everything is connected. And when you conduct this type of historical research into a particular designer, and this is one of the the more exciting things, and when you're actually able to find those connections, you can make really tremendous discoveries, because you're able to track the network of this designer, and then hopefully find this, match the correspondence, because maybe with CPP Nels, we have only the incoming letters, right? But then we'll have the outgoing letters. And so a very big yes, this is definitely one of my favorite kind of discoveries and understanding, and again, this kind of just a deeper insight to the whole industry, and to the fact that we're all working together and we're influenced by one another all the time.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I think somehow we like to see like a person or like one designer as a kind of genius, like the only one genius and the brain in a way, like who has all the access like to different ideas and to different styles and so on.
Right.
But yeah, most of the case we do not value the people who worked for them, and maybe they were quite important and they hold the key like to some of the works. And yeah, maybe this kind of secrets we can discover and uncover as well.
And again, I think that Martha Scottford has kind of coined this term so specifically of this messy history, because it's very hard sometimes to attribute one thing to one person, because so many people were involved. And then, as we speak, I'm being reminded of another thing that kind of came up during those the discussions in the classroom, which is, where do we put the value? So what designers are famous, and what are they famous for? Is it because they run the biggest company and they have, the biggest profits? What about design educators and their impact on the world? What about all these women? And we didn't touch on that, on that kind of next, the next chapter in this history. But the theme of women being paid half of the wage as men, and them not being unionized, or not being allowed to unionize. So basically they were cheap labor for a very, very long time. And with the progress of technology and mechanizing, you see more and more women on the production side, with even like the first example that comes to mind is, the invention of the typewriter. And it was marketed as a product that was so easy to use that even a woman can operate it. And you see this in the advertisement and everywhere. So mechanizing processes became, again, a feminine role, and women were kind of reduced to those production work. And specifically when you see the means of production, and I'm actually quoting the title of a very important documentary by Briar Levitt, that really depicts in a wonderful way how graphic design was produced throughout history. But you see that there were mostly women that were actually the ones who were producing those works, especially at the phototype era. So are they more important? Are they less important? I mean, the art director could have not done it without them. They could have not done it without the art director. Everything is so tightly connected. Where does it begin and where does it end? So yeah, it's again such a broad topic, and it touches so many different aspects. It is very interesting and very relevant as well, as you mentioned.
Yeah, thank you very much. As long as I keep listening to you, like I have more and more questions. But maybe two questions which are somehow connected to each other, I think. So changing a little bit the topic, but I think in the talk, or in your talk, you also mentioned female roles in the whole game. So somehow we are supposed to be like consumers, but then we are also like cheap laborers, and women designing like towards a target group that are also women. So how do you think like this whole system works together? Like this is one part of the question. And at the same time, I think, especially looking at the illustration by CP Pinellas, like which you shown us at the beginning, you can see somehow like she's trying not to be like one of the fan club of Aga. And this is quite interesting because she's not involving herself too much into this. So can imagine like this is based on a very critical position of her, that she's also looking critical at the whole game. So, and how do you, or is there this critical reflection also in her design? Do you see it like in the magazine covers that she's also using maybe kind of a humor to paint or illustrate women? And is there like this critical position visible in her work? So sorry, like maybe two questions that come together, but yeah.
So for the first part of your question, I think that if you go back to a time where there was no fluidity within gender roles, and everything was set in very, those very restrictive boxes, it maybe would have made sense, for specific groups to create content and visual content, and whatever it is for specific groups. It could be the case, but I don't think it necessarily should be, especially with the resources and maybe with good intentions and well-researched work. And again, I'm trying to do it in a very kind of broad way, just to kind of break out of this very old-fashioned and very, very basically hard way of living for everyone, right? Very limiting experience. The other thing that I'm thinking of specifically in terms of magazines is that an idea that I read in the book that kind of talks about specifically popular women's magazine, and it's the idea of those really segmented journals. So maybe, I don't know, considering health issues, women would need specific kind of dedicated magazine that has to do with the female biology. But you can see that this kind of phenomena, at least in the printed press, I don't know how much of that really translates to online now. You have so many different magazines directed to women. I'll give you one example from the top of my head. There was a magazine called Golf for Women. And the question is, why would you want to read about golf for women? Why wouldn't you just want to read about golf, right? Or any kind of sport? So it really, to my mind, begs the question if this is another, kind of advertising specific tool. And again, we're talking about this time where, let's say, the balance between selling advertisement in order for the consumer to pay less for the journal itself was very restricted to, let's say, having 40% advertisement and 60% content. And the content was very, it was way longer, and our attention span was, of course, way longer, and we read more. But as we progress in time, we see that ratio was not kept, and as we see today in media, sometimes we're just drowning with advertisements, and you not exactly know what am I consuming, right? So is that specific magazine for women who golf? What type of product is it really? So again, like a very kind of maybe a little bit of a messy answer. And the second part specifically about CP Pinellas, and this is to the best of my understanding so far, because this type of research really is not ending. And again, I started researching this topic, and was able to kind of visit many different and diverse women. So I'm not, by no means, I'm not an expert on C.P. Pinellas, but I do think that this would definitely prompt me into kind of digging specifically for an answer. From what I understand, she was not a feminist. She was a very, very shrewd and talented businesswoman. So on top of her creativity, or maybe part of this kind of sense of creativity and design and talents, and we can see it in her interview and her fantastic sense of humor, there was something that was very connected to the business and to the profit. And so I think there was a really deep understanding there, which makes it even more and more interesting now to see if she was, if there was some critique that she was able to insert there. So the quick answer is that I don't know. I do know from interviews with her colleagues that she was pushing very hard for the women around her to be able to be working career women and mothers. And again, she had the financial ability to do that. They had a caretaker for the children, and she was working close enough to home so she could come and still kind of take an active part in her children's lives. But that was something that I know specifically that she really advocated for. It was no longer the choice between being a career woman or being a mother. So I'm trying to see if I remember anything else. No, not at this moment, but but thank you for this question. I will definitely kind of dig deeper into that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's interesting because in the interview she has mentioned like the payment, and yeah, that she belonged to the group that was really kind of like cheap labor, a cheap labor group. So, and I think she did it in a very charming way, like not really saying anyone is somehow paying her too less or something like that, but she's saying like this was the general attitude towards that or in that time, and that this was somehow the problem that everyone had to deal with, like yes, while working as a woman.
Right. And it's interesting because out of the other recorded interviews that Professor Remington has conducted, there was this recurring question about how they felt during their work. And from that particular generation, it was really interesting to hear this one very consistent answer from most of them. And they said, we were just happy to work. So just the fact that they could find, their own path, that they can be creative and productive was such a privilege. So this is what kind of I'm hearing, that whatever you had to kind of suffer, you just did. Also, and I think this is something that I know that I can somehow identify, this is happening in the 50s and in the 60s, and really before the second wave feminism. So before there was an actual awareness of how women were discriminated, specifically in the workforce, if we're talking about that. So it may have been one of those things that, you realize in hindsight, because that's your reality and you have like one view of it. And once you're able to maybe step out of it or have someone kind of shine a different spotlight on it, then things, start to move. So that's how I was kind of thinking about it.
Yeah, I think so. And still, like, we are not at the point where we can say like we have same payment, or we achieved like this point where we can say we get the same salary for the same work and for the same like time that we invest in our work. yeah, so maybe there's still a long way to go.
Absolutely. Yes, but I think to that point, it's even more important to look at the history, to look at the achievements, and to really find it kind of inspiring and empowering to make things even better.
Yes, and I think it's also important to see like how many women were really like working in this area and doing great design.
Yeah, and also the fact that, sorry, did I?
No, please go ahead.
Just the fact that it is such a major interest now, and we keep learning more and more about not only the women, but most of, just again, those marginalized voices in society. So basically everyone who was not white and male. And this openness and this curiosity and this really, I think, willingness to unlearn what we've learned so far and to really open our minds and crave this information and this messy history. I feel like it's a really exciting time where research in design history is being focused towards it. So we're just in the beginning, right? But I'm very curious to just continue and learn about it.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Like one very final question. Is it possible to visit the archive even if you are not, for example, working at your university or not a student, but just interested to see the archive?
Absolutely, yes. So we are completely accessible to the public. And this is, again, one of the many really exciting aspects in working in such a fantastic place like the Carey collection. So there are so many different ways to have access to our collections. First of all, we have a very large digital collection. So we are on this ongoing mission that COVID kind of gave us a lot of time to enhance, and we keep digitizing as many items as we can. You can, if you happen to be in Rochester, you can just come in and visit us. There's no need for appointments, and we're always happy to receive visits. We're also very active in seeking and supporting outside researchers. So at the moment we have one summer fellowship that will be open soon. And there are a few more outreach activities that we're always, that I hope will be announced again in the future. So yeah, the answer is a big yes. And if there's anything that sparked an interest or anything that you see online on our website, please just email me, and yeah, and we'll do whatever we can to share this kind of wealth of resources that we have with anyone who's interested.
Yeah, thank you very much. Wonderful. I hope my students get really much inspired and yeah, starting to look at physical archives, and maybe like one of them will visit your institution.
It'll be perfect.
Okay.
We'll be very, very happy.
Okay, thank you very much for the talk.
My pleasure.
And, yes.
Okay.
So we stop here.